as to a long statement. Well, you know, when I left the Department of Justice, I felt some obligation to struggle as an individual for freedom in this society, so I tried to seek out what were to me the critical issues if we're to live in freedom and dignity. And the cases have changed with the times. After all, the times create the critical needs of the people and that have to be addressed. But early on, I was in cases like the Harrisburg 8 case, which involved Philip Berrigan. And, it really tested the truthfulness of the government. If the government's not true, what chance do the people have for a good life?
What was the big lie in that case?
The big lie was the contention that these people were...
Could you begin the big lie in that case?
The Harrisburg case was a big lie, and it tried to tell the American people that those who sought peace were dangerous and violent, even terrorists, that they planned to kidnap Henry Kissinger, that they were going to use explosives and destroy underground heating tunnels under the Forrestal building or the Pentagon. They changed their position from time to time in Washington. The indictment was drafted in a very cunning way to include in the same counts things that they did, like raid draft boards, because they thought it was immoral for this society to draft the poor and send them to Vietnam to kill the poor while the college kids were off in studying about the happy tomorrows. So it had to be disproven, and I think it was. The director of the FBI's reputation was on the line, and he failed to prove his case with all of his resources. After that, it was cases like the president of student body at Kent State, Craig Morgan. As fine a young American as you would want to meet. After the National Guard killed 4, the state of Ohio, in its dignity, indicted 27 students. Same thing we see in student protests all over the world. Thomas Merton University in Thailand, another place I've been to work on a case where some claim as many as 400 students were killed in a slaughter early one morning because the King of Siam didn't like what the students were saying, and then they indict the rest. Craig Morgan, after 2 years of misery under indictment, finally was released.
We have to change the
I don't know how to make those cases.
People out there. The Harrisburg case and Kissinger in the tunnel, they're very, very meaningful. You found it was impossible to try certain cases because you couldn't get a judge, even though you were sure you had evidence. Is that a correct interpretation of the thing that I heard you say? Or
yeah. You know,
if it's true, could we go back and I'll ask you that question, because I think...
Now, do you want more cases than just those two?
Oh, no, we want to go forward. Yeah. We want to go any way you want to go, but I mean, I won't interrupt you. We'll cover it all. I'll interrupt you just to get you to move around a little bit more.
Let me
we're not doing anything now, so...
Let me take a couple more cases. And
I'm going to stand where you want me to stand. How's that? Do I stand between the two of you? So that...
Yeah, that'd be ideal.
Okay. Are you ready, Carlos? You've got a beat on Ramsey? Okay. We can continue either way. Good morning, Molly. You want to come in?
Oh, well, I think I'm going to go over the next.
Okay.
Hi, Molly.
If you want to continue with the cases, Thailand and whatever you like.
Well, let me go on for a couple of minutes and see what it's. I later spent a good many months in Buffalo, New York, after the Attica prison rebellion, defending prisoners there. We have a prison archipelago in America that's as cruel and inhumane as any gulag archipelago on earth. Hundreds of thousands of young men in prison being brutalized at any given time. Overwhelmingly minorities, black, Hispanic, and they need to be defended. They're people too. They have rights. We killed 39 of them outright for defying our authority at Attica. That wasn't necessary. And then we indicted them. We never indicted ourselves for the 39 people killed by police gunfire. We indicted them for prison disturbances, other offenses. And we need to believe that they have rights. Lately, I've spent an enormous amount of time on death penalty cases. I think they're critical. We should stop executions now. The common roots of murder, and war, and genocide, and capital punishment have to be clear to all who care about survival. Each is premised on the belief that you can solve problems by killing people. We have over 700 people on death row now. My God, the rivers will flow with blood if we don't come to our senses and stop capital punishment. I felt an obligation to work abroad on human rights cases, too. I think your credibility abroad is not worth much, though, if you haven't done something at home, if you don't have some way of showing people that you're not just preaching to them, that you're practicing at home. And in that connection, I've worked in past court trials in South Africa, Leningrad trials, Sverdlovsk on the Don, Kharkov, and Rostov on the Don, many other places. Thailand, as I mentioned, and Pakistan, the Ali Bhutto trial, and others.
Could we go back now a few years in your life? You were Attorney General of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us something about the frustration, your frustration? May I also say in passing what TV interviewers don't say, that what you just said then was tremendous. Mm-hmm. It was eloquent and right on the button. Should we go back a bit now to your days in the Attorney Generalship? And did you experience frustrations, or am I incorrect? I mean, what was it like?
Well,
don't forget that question isn't in there.
Yeah, being Attorney General seemed to me to be an awfully good opportunity to do something helpful for people. I think most vastly overrate the power. You know, public opinion is far more powerful than the law. We should never forget that. And public opinion is dominated by our culture. Culture is lord of everything, of mortals and immortals king, Pender said. And struggle as you might as Attorney General, for instance, to bring to trial, say, the police officers who murdered 3 young men at Orangeburg State College in Orangeburg, South Carolina, in what was called the Orangeburg Massacre in February of 1968, shows the futility of law power against public opinion. We couldn't get a federal judge first to convene a grand jury. The students had done nothing. This was a predominantly black college. They were protesting because they were not permitted to bowl in a public bowling alley in downtown Orangeburg, South Carolina, though Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 gave them that federally protected right. And the University of South Carolina had a huge gym costing $15 million with underground bowling alleys. The cost of that gym exceeded the whole cost of their university combined. So they were protesting. 3 were killed and 25 were shot. They had double-aught buckshot pellets in the bottoms of their feet, in the backs, and the buttocks, shot while they were laying on the ground. We couldn't get a grand jury convened. We finally got a grand jury convened. We couldn't get an indictment. We discharged that grand jury, and we got another grand jury. We couldn't get a grand jury to indict, though you had TV film of an officer emptying a service revolver at students laying on the ground not 50 feet from him, 6 shots, and you couldn't get an indictment. I finally signed an information, which meant under federal law it had to be a misdemeanor. Maximum penalty a year, 3 dead students, 25 critically wounded. We went to trial. We tried the case for months, and not guilty. Algiers Motel, famous case in Detroit riots. John Hersey wrote an important book about it. We brought indictments against police officers who abused the rights of people. Couldn't get indictments. Chicago National Convention. While I was Attorney General, we brought indictments, that is, the grand jury returned indictments against 8 police officers for violating the rights of people who had come to speak, to assemble, to pray, about what was going on in this country, the Vietnam War and the Democratic National Convention, the Democratic Party's responsibility to do something decent about it. We couldn't get convictions. We had one case, the first case we went to trial on against a police officer, we had TV film. It was up in Lincoln Park in Chicago. You see a kid driving down toward two squad cars. He looked like he's 10 or 12 years old on a bicycle. Turns out the only way he can get home is to come across this little bridge. The police yell at him to stop. He keeps riding. An officer strides across, pushes the bike over. The kid goes sprawling. Another officer picks up the bike, walks over to the edge of the bridge, and throws the thing in. You then see an officer coming right toward the camera, and then you see trees and sky. For some reason, they didn't take the film out of the camera. The judge won't let it go to the jury. And then, of course, we had the Chicago 7 trial for those who were trying to protest and exercise that fundamental American right of free conscience and free speech.
I think that's very good.
Do you have any sense of futility in the face of past history?
Well, futility doesn't solve problems. You have a sense it's not easy. You have a sense you have to struggle and try. It requires some faith, and you need to have fun along the way.
Ramsey, you spoke about the frustrations of the job when you were Attorney General. From another approach, is there anything you did as Attorney General which, if you had the opportunity, you would not do again?
Well, if I could begin by saying, so it's not all on the negative side, that enforcing the laws that assure Americans equal protection is awfully important. And, we did get a Voting Rights Act. It's one of the most exciting experiments in the history of democracy. It revolutionized politics in the South and society in the South to a very considerable degree. Changed things. I don't mean to say there's not racism prevalent still, but blacks can swim in the pools of the cities and the private pools, and they can go to the schools, and they can eat in the restaurants, and now if we'll just give them a chance for jobs and all the rest, we'll be amazed at what they can do in enriching our lives. Our chief priority in the enforcement field was against violations of individual rights by government, on the theory that who protects the rights of the citizens when the police are the violators. And I think that does some good. I opposed
9:30, by the way.
Yeah, I opposed capital punishment, and there was no execution in the United States from 1967 until Gary Gilmore in 1970.
The thrust of my question is really, are there any prosecutions that you were involved in when you were Attorney General of which you're not particularly proud today?
The capacity of the Attorney General to know about many cases is very limited. We were returning about 32,000, 33,000 criminal cases a year. An Attorney General who was really very familiar with the office, as I think I was, I'd been there 6 years after all before I became Attorney General, I would have known something by then, would be lucky to know, several hundred. We brought the Spock case. I personally reviewed it. No one else has real responsibility for that. I decided that case. And, it's hard to know. Hindsight obscures the solid angularity of fact. At the time, we were having thousands of people who refused military service. I happened to empathize with them at the time. In the main, though, they were young people unable to protect themselves, really not always understanding exactly the potential consequences of their acts. So I often said, even at the time, at least we picked on someone who could take care of himself, Benjamin Spock and the rest, and it gave breathing time and room. I was awfully concerned about the case because it did approach speech. I believe the government has the highest obligation to protect the right of free speech. So it really probably doesn't help for me to reanalyze it. We lost the case, and I'm glad. I mean, we got convictions, you remember. I should add, too, that my recommendation to the court was no prison time, absolutely no prison time, because it makes no sense to send a William Sloane Coffin or a Benjamin Spock to prison. And now I have to go to.
Can you give us just 20 seconds for a cutaway and then? Okay. Will you look at me? It's not the world.
Do I have to?
Yeah, you do. It'll stimulate you when you're comparing me to sauce.
If you want a smiling picture, you're asking quite a lot.
It's quite a lot. Think of sauce, and you won't have to smile.
Keep talking.
Well, now, see, I ran out of things to say.
No, I had a question, Ramsey. You know, you've been all around the world helping
Look at me.
defend other people under other systems.
I'm sorry.
Hear me out.
What's that you weren't there?
Well, I come home primarily with the feeling that we have to do better, that we can do a lot better, that the vast majority of those charged with crime in the United States do not have the effective assistance. We vastly underfinance our public defenders, our legal aid offices that handle criminal cases. 95% of the lawyer's time goes to 5% of the people in the country, and the poor don't have much of a chance. Also, just we employ our criminal sanctions against the poor. It's overwhelmingly property crime, but if you look at the property crime by the middle class and the rich, you see that it's committed with impunity. In fact, it's the grand American tradition. So we really have this enormous distortion in the application of criminal sanctions. It's a way of keeping the poor in their place. That's why our prisons are full of poor, young, minority males. And I think that's profoundly important. In terms of our procedures, they are probably better honed to achieve fair fact-finding and rational application. Cross-examination doesn't really mean much in that context. But cultural dynamics can place as great a compulsion on you to speak the truth there as cross-examination can elicit here, perhaps. It's very hard to